Voyages 8 and 9 took an unusual turn in that a good friend for many years had some time earlier expressed a fleeting interest in my escapades with Mother Ayahuasca. After many challenging questions and conversations, he decided to take the plunge and attend the May 2019 voyage with me. My friend, whom we will call T, although interested, maintained a healthy skepticism towards what he was being told up until the point where he did his very first breathwork exercise, and then things began to change for the better, of course. We won't get into too much personal details about T, just to say that in recent years, life circumstances, pressures, depression, anxiety had mounted to drive him to attempt suicide. You could say that this attempted suicide was a cry or call for help, but that is a terrible oversimplification of a very complex set of issues. His suicide attempt culminated in him driving at speed in a car from a bridge, and instead of hitting the water, he was lucky enough to hit an ash tree. The tree prevented him from hitting the water. You could say it was his very own tree of life. The tree may well have saved his life, but left him lying in a hospital intensive care unit with some serious and very painful injuries. But he still doesn't blame the ash tree. Ash trees are not usually associated with saving lives, as their wood is primarily used to make hurling sticks. The hurling stick is used in a traditional game called hurling, a game principally associated with brutality, aggression, and hostility. The hurl, as it is colloquially called, is used to play the game of hurling and is responsible for many broken bones, fractured skulls, and certain degrees of brain damage. However, on the flip side of all this damage, the ash tree is also associated with change, growth, and is a symbol of rebirth, as in to rise from the ashes. And it also makes great firewood when dried out properly, so can also provide warmth and comfort. T, by all accounts, should have been killed stone dead on that fateful night, but somehow he magically survived and arose from the ash tree. T had been battered and bruised externally and internally. He had broken several ribs, his sternum and collarbone, his shoulder blade had all but disintegrated, plus his spinal discs had been damaged, and into the bargain he had punctured a lung in 2 places. He was a physical, mental, and emotional wreck, as was the car, if he doesn't mind me saying so. This was not T's first attempt at suicide, as he had on one occasion tried to drink himself into oblivion and slit his wrists on another. The driving over the bridge was his final commitment, and although he had now reached a new bottom, he hadn't managed to reach the rocks at the bottom of the river thanks to the ash tree's intervention. In the aftermath of surviving his crash, although he was broken up in a metaphorical and literal sense, there was perhaps still something he felt he wanted to hang on to and stay living for, well, for a little while longer at least. Upon his first initial waking up in casualty, he felt he didn't wish or want to go back to the place that drove him to such an edge. T had no memory of the crash itself, but felt an internal pressure to somehow sort himself out. He didn't know at the time how this sorting himself out would present itself. For the moment, it was simply about survival, getting through the hours, days, and weeks ahead. These events occurred late in 2013, on the cusp of the new year. Approximately 8 days after the crash and 3 days into the new year, T discharged himself from hospital against advice of attending nurses, doctors and consultant. You could say that T wanted to be back in control, as he freely admits himself, and that may have been part of the original problem in the first place. From T's crash up to the point where he went on a voyage with Mother Ayahuasca had been 5 years of pain management and physical therapy, with no medium or long-term pain relief. Every day was about management of pain and a very slow crawl towards a physical recovery of sorts, thus up to physical traumas that led to his attempted suicides and or the trauma, anxiety or stress that ensued in its aftermath, although there was light ahead. In retrospect, and later speaking to T, perhaps out of a desperation, he decided to give Mother Ayahuasca a go, as he himself said he didn't want to go back to the bottom again. And he felt a personal, internal pressure to sort himself out, so to speak. T's interest in Mother Ayahuasca was probably sparked because of the self or natural healing aspects relayed to him via our main challenging discussions. Early in 2019, T decided to take the plunge and at least book a flight. Up to the point where he booked a flight to go, he was still not entirely convinced that this was the right thing for him, although he still had the option of not going even after booking the flight. Nonetheless, T turned up to the airport, resigned to the fact that if he did not like what was going on around him, he could still turn around, go into the city for a few days and then fly back home. The initial arrival and first impression of the venue didn't quite set T's mind at ease either. It occurred to him this may be some sort of kumbaya or religious congregation. It was only after being welcomed by the guides and then meeting and chatting to some of the other people attending that he felt a bit more relaxed and perhaps realized most of these people seemed more like him than not. Anyone who spoke to him seemed genuine, calm and non-judgmental. Some people had been here before and voyaged with Mother Ayahuasca and some had not. Most people had a level of trepidation about the whole thing, just like him. And most seemed relatively normal, just like him, for whatever normal is or means. Despite his reservations, T pushed on through to the next day. The next day was preparation day, encompassing sharing, dancing and breathwork. The group share was nothing to write home about. Each individual introduced him or herself and shared their intentions or provided an outline of why they felt or thought they were here. T did initially feel slightly uncomfortable with the dancing part, but soon got into it when he began to remember and realize he had always very much enjoyed to dance. Dancing is something he had forgotten about. It used to bring him joy, as he remembered. He was and still is a good dancer. He just needed some subtle reminding. That evening was going to be T's first ever breathwork exercise. T had not had any previous experience of breathwork or meditation for that matter. So this was all relatively new hippy-dippy stuff for him. But as this was all about just lying down and being in a relatively relaxed state whilst listening to some music, any previous concerns he may have had began to fade away. Thus far, this all seemed easy enough. As per T's description, in the first 5 minutes or so of the breathwork, T stayed at ease, sitting upright, and he began to feel some bad pain in his shoulder and ribs. Then the pain forced him to lie down, as he felt the pain turn to some sort of tingling energy running about his hands and body. His body then began to cram up with more pain in his legs, and he felt stiff, inflexible, and unable to move so much as an inch without feeling more pain. He managed to move his hands to where he felt his pain was, and began to rub the area to self-soothe the pain as it began to move back up his legs into the ribs and shoulders. As he moved and self-soothed the pain as it travelled, it began to slowly dissipate or seem to dissolve itself. At this point, some confusion was setting in with him as to what was going on. All this was totally unexpected. He sat up. It seemed to him that the top half of his body was reliving the car crash again, as in the memory of waking up in casualty in hospital was reoccurring or was somehow being relieved. The feelings that began to flood his mind on waking in casualty began to resurface, as in a deep sense of regret, shame, and sadness. What the hell did he do? And what the fuck was going on? It was then that he remembered. It hit him. He had also felt an overwhelming sense of relief to still be alive. He had no conscious memory of the crash, and something now was coming back to him with some stunning feelings. His broken body had somehow begun to remember his pain and suffering. At this point, with T sitting upright, a guide approached him and asked him straight out, "Where is your pain?" T answered, "All down my right side." The guide then beckoned the lead facilitator to come over, which he did of course, and asked T to explain his pain. T explained that he felt the tingling of pins. The lead guide explained that these pins and needles he was feeling are his body's energy healing his pain, and that he should carry on rubbing and self-soothing for a few minutes more until his pain had dissipated, or he could no longer feel the pins and needles. As T explains it, he continued rubbing for a little while longer and then felt good enough to get up and walk it off. The pain he had felt for the past 5 years had somehow suddenly dissipated from his body in less than an hour's worth of breath work. His breath work exercise was better than just pain relief. It was self-healing. Looking back on the breathwork experience, T added that he wished he had known more about all this stuff before he voyaged, as he feels it possibly could have helped him even more. But there was still more to come. After all, this was only breathwork. That night, the night before his first voyage with Mother Ayahuasca, T felt very nervous about what was to come the next day. So much that it showed in his demeanor. The lead facilitator spotted this and sat with him to discuss what was going on with him and why he looked concerned. T explained he had never done anything like this before and had always associated this sort of stuff with doing drugs, which he was always completely against. The lead facilitator told him that he had the choice to not take the medicine, or he could offer him half a cup, and if he felt he was doing okay on half a cup and felt comfortable enough, he could take another half measure more or just leave it. It was his choice entirely, and there was absolutely no need to take it or feel under any pressure to do so. This put T's mind at ease, so he decided to sleep on it. T's first voyage with Mother Ayahuasca. The morning of the ceremony came and T had decided to take his medicine in small doses as suggested by the lead facilitator. We all took our medicine and T took his half glass, and the ceremony began with a guided chakra meditation. About 20 or so minutes into the chakra meditation, the lead facilitator offered T another half glass of ayahuasca when he downed it in one. We began the guided meditation by sitting upright. Most of us, including T, had our blindfolds on. The idea being, you begin by sitting upright, and then when you feel the need to lie down, you lie down. T didn't know or hadn't remembered this and stayed sitting upright until the meditation reached his head chakra. By then, he could no longer force himself to remain sitting in an upright position. As he says himself, he fought having to lie down. He would have laid down a lot sooner, but did not know he could or was allowed to. The moment T surrendered and lay down, he dove straight into his voyage. Feelings and thoughts of why am I doing this? What have I done to myself? Began to wash over him. For a moment he felt lonely and isolated and devoid of any answers to these questions and feelings. He then felt an ease come over him. His thoughts began to fade and switch off. He began walking away from his thoughts of loneliness and isolation and observed his surroundings about and ahead of him. He strolled through a tunnel of vines and walked for ages, leaving his thoughts behind him. And the more he walked through the vines, the more relaxed and calmer he felt. Then began the emergence of the memory of the pain from his crash. He had not previously remembered the crash itself, but this was brought back to him in the vivid detail of pain. Then, although his body was lying on the ground, he got the feeling of falling from his walking, standing position and fell vertically to his knees, to the ground, back into his body. He heard someone clearly speak to him and say, "You're going to be alright. You're going to be alright." Something or someone began to rub and massage his shoulders and head as his pain began to dissipate and dissolve. His pain was gone. When T said it was gone, he meant it was really gone. This place he now found himself in, he didn't wish to leave, which of course is quite understandable, given the previous conditions he had begun to get used to. Pain or no pain. An easy choice, really. Just at this point, T began to tune in to another voyager in our group, and her sounds began to make him giggle and laugh and bring him in from what he thought at the time might be the end of his voyage. T said although he was happy and was laughing, there was a part of him that didn't want the voyage to end. When the other voyager went quiet, for some reason he sat upright and took off his blindfold. When he did, he felt the room vibrating and the floor looked like squirming snakes. He took his eyes from the floor and began watching one of the dancing guides. She waved her hands from side to side, up and down. She had several sets of hands and arms. He began to see and feel the momentum and stillness of time all at once. Although this was fascinating to watch, it did make him a little queasy. So he stood up to go to the bathroom, and as per usual, a couple of his trusty guides, who had been observing him, went over to him and helped him steady himself and guide him to where he wished to go. Feeling these motions and stillnesses of time was obviously his cue to purge what he had to purge, so purge he did. And he was happy, and now coming back into this plane of reality, well, as much as one can be in this plane of reality. Later that evening, after his first voyage, T told me that he had checked with the lead facilitator and most of the guides to ask if anyone had said to him, "You're going to be alright, you're going to be alright," and if anyone had massaged or rubbed his shoulders and head, but none had. So someone or something else obviously had. He never did find out who had comforted him or had eased his pain away, and he still has his suspicions, although he's not sure how anyone would have known to say this to him at this particular time. It seemed to be the right thing at the right time. Coincidental or what? But there was even more to go for T. T's second voyage with Mother Ayahuasca, with the breath work and his first voyage behind him, T became comfortable in himself. drink his first full glass of ayahuasca. This voyage began quite unusually, with us imbibing our ayahuasca while standing up, and the lead facilitator expressing to all to have a great voyage just before drinking. In a standing position, we commenced our meditation, working our way up through our chakras. T tells me he felt he had to lay down about halfway into the meditation when we had just reached the heart chakra. Upon laying down, T relaxed and began his own deep breathwork exercise. Then Mother Ayahuasca brought him back into his tunnel of vines. But these vines were different. Instead of being illuminated silver like tinsel or glitter, this tunnel led him to a pub where, ahead in front of him, stood a bar with a whole array of alcoholic drinks. The drink that stood out most was a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey. T moved forward to enter the bar room, and an unseen force blocked his entry from getting to the bar or to the drinks. He wanted to get to the bar and have the drinks, but was being prevented by something. Pushing forward, he eventually began to push through the force field. A hand went through, an arm went through, then his face and head and the rest of his body followed. But although his body was now in, he didn't feel like he had gotten all the way in or wanted to be all the way in. T felt another sense of calm come over him, and pulling himself back and away from the bar, asked himself, is this what I really want? He felt an energy pulling him to the right and in the right direction, away from concerning himself with the bar and its contents. This had the effect of bringing him into a place of complete relaxation and calm, back to feeling like he was being massaged and soothed all over his body. Whatever was massaging him kept whispering to him, you don't need the alcohol. You're going to be okay. After some time, T slowly returned to his plane of reality, took off his blindfold, sat upright and enjoyed his thoughts. He wanted to get home to his children and express that this crash would never happen again, and he would never be so silly as to contemplate such a thing again. Happy to be alive, he realized there had been and were other options to what he had done, and he now completely preferred other options. He was ready to be in the world once again. Note: as friends on these voyages, T and myself were not located near each other in the room. During our respective voyages, T was not aware of me, nor me him. We each did our own thing, and later shared our experiences as best we could. Whilst this is a ceremony you can attend with someone, it is something you do completely on your own, and rightly so. The personal voyage or journey is something you do for you and you alone.